So I really do think, when you put all of those things together, look, I think the economy, this is a good transition to, the economy piece. So we could put A7 up on the screen here. I do think the economy is the central piece, but these other factors, whether it's Israel, whether it's the just gaudy show of wealth and opulence, sucking up to these tech oligarchs and handing them everything that they could possibly want. The crypto, the smash and grab, all the corrupt deals and padding the pockets of you and your family and your aides, the insider trading, all of that sort of stuff. And you couple that with a dire economic landscape that feels like it's only getting worse and worse. Yeah, there's going to be a political reckoning there to pay. So this was G. Elliott Morris wrote this up. And the astonishing thing here, if we can hold on this for a moment, is that you had a voters' number one issue, as it usually is, was the economy. If you look at Abigail Spanberger in Virginia, 48% of voters said the economy was their number one issue. Of those, 63% voted for Abigail Spanberger. In New Jersey, similar numbers, 32% said that the economy was their number one issue. Taxes was another one that was a significant issue there as well. I think Chitterelli really put that on the table. But in any case, of those economy voters, Mikey Sherrill won 65%. Guys, this represents a 93-point swing away from the Republicans compared to the 2024 election. Economy voters went for Trump in the 60%. So it was the number one issue in 2024, and those voters overwhelmingly chose Trump. And now here we are a year later, and Democrats are winning 2/3, roughly, of the voters who say the economy is their number one issue. Put A8 up on the screen here because I think this is also really important. I mentioned this before the election, but I just wanted to underscore this. This is incredibly telling. So right now, in November 2025, 72% of Americans say economic conditions in the country today are poor. 72%, only 28% say that they are good. If you rewind back to Trump's first term, to the same period in Trump's first term, you had an almost complete flip of those numbers. 68% at that point said, actually, the economy's good. And only 30% said it was poor. And I will remind you that even with those sorts of strong economic numbers, you still had a backlash election in 2018 that was overall very positive for Democrats. So now, with the economic numbers looking so dire and possible, we're obviously tracking closely the AI bubble and what that means and all of these layoffs, some caused by AI as well. Things could be worse by the time we get to the midterm elections. And so that reckoning happened in 2018. Just imagine what we could be in store for here in 2026, given that you have all kinds of upset over Trump and, his authoritarian tactics and his foreign policy and all those sorts of things. And you also have incredibly dire economic conditions and very negative sentiment about the economy.
It doesn't take a genius to figure it all out, does it? To your point about authoritarianism, or just generally, like, what is society in particular?
Yeah.
So sorry, let's not go too deep, shall we? But everyone agrees that if somebody is threatening someone on the street, that their rights have to be at least somewhat deprived so that other people's rights are not deprived, correct? Right? Everyone agrees with that. Now, when I think about the most authoritarian but high-functioning societies in the world, you can look at Singapore, where you literally cannot enter the country with chewing gum. They do public canings. They have rigid enforcement. But when you're in Singapore, it's awesome. Okay, that's the dirty little secret about it. People who live there, they like it. And honestly, why? Because it's clean, it functions, they have good jobs, they have an extremely high level of state functioning, and they buy into that. And they don't really care very much. In fact, they laugh at America and they say we are less free because of our freedoms. They're like, yeah, you are free, to be assaulted by somebody. You're free to live in a shithole. You're free to have horrible public transit. When you ask the Chinese people who actually broadly support the Chinese Communist Party, they're like, yeah, I can't talk badly about Xi Jinping. But, remember that video I showed you of Chengdu from 1980 to today? If you lived through that, that's one of the most extraordinary economic and physical transformations in the history of mankind. So, yeah, you're like, okay, whatever. But here, be honest, have things gotten better? No. All right. And, it's not the same. We don't have centralized control and there's local stuff and all of that. But at the end of the day, if you don't give somebody a lot of benefits, and you see that happening, then obviously people are going to say, well, I'd rather at least not have to deal with that, or to feel as if there is chaos in my country. And I think broadly, that's where even the people who do support some of this they all admit the chaos, but they're saying that the chaos is the point. I think there is like a logical insanity to that, which is that it incites self-deportation. So you can say, okay, it's net worth it or whatever in the end, but I don't think that's a gamble that 90% of people are willing to take, which is part of the issue, is that broadly under Biden it felt chaotic. This is just not just on immigration, but I think generally, like because his old age made it so that nobody was running the show.
Yeah.
And under Trump here, there's kind of an element to that as well, because you have all these disparate parts of the government. They're not talking to one another, and everybody's constantly beefing. I mean, I'm still knee deep in Venezuela. I'm getting calls every single day from, he changed his mind. By the way, I can currently update that he has changed his mind currently because of a more recent update.
Oh,
who knows?
We're invading Nigeria now, apparently.
Yeah, well, we may bomb Nigeria. But my point around Venezuela, right, it's like one of those where everyone is kind of just willing, is under this, this mafioso like system where people who are vying for the ears of the boss. Remember my analogy of Trump is that it's like Versailles, right? It's like whoever gets the ear of King Louis while he's taking a shit is ultimately the great victor. And
well, he feels checked down half the time too. I mean, there's significant portions
like this ballroom shit.
All the ICE stuff that's like all put into Stephen Miller's purview and Kristi Noem and whatever.
But then even they're fighting, like Stephen and Kirsty are fighting, and then Corey Lewandowski, her alleged boyfriend, is the person who is underneath that.
Yeah.
And then you've got the Border Patrol guy who's beefing with the head of ICE
guy.
And then you got Tom Homan who's beefing with him. And it's like trying to explain this to a liberal doesn't make any sense because they don't actually understand like the intra party like beef over. But it actually does matter because it manifests in where it is right now. In a lot of ways, ICE is losing because their image is being subsumed by Border Patrol. Now, again, try explaining that to a defund, abolish ICE person, but it actually kind of matters because the ICE people are like, hey, we want to arrest criminals, drug dealers, rapists, and the Border Patrol people are like, no, we want to do these vast raids where we seize everybody up.
They're the ones who did like the apartment
exactly.
with the Black Hawk military helicopters. They actually are more militarized and have their own like basically mini Air Force. They have drones, they have helicopters, whatever. And so it looks like they're winning the battle right now. You had a huge ICE, a bunch of ICE guys who got fired and replaced with CBP types. So in any case, to your point, yes, even though there's a lot happening, but every week it's, we're here, we're there, this is our focus, that's our focus, now we're in this city, no, we're not getting into that city. And meanwhile, you've got, these images of like mass thugs tear gassing kids going to a Halloween parade. I don't think it's making people feel like, you've got this under control and I'm gonna get some actual benefit out of this. Another example of the authoritarianism that, has been popular is Bukele, right? Down in El Salvador. But what did he do? Through
I'm glad to hear you admit that.
It's true. Yeah, first of all, they had much worse crime than we had, right, in terms of the level of lawlessness. And he genuinely, through horrific tactics that I would never support, he has brought the crime rate down.
Yeah, but you might support
that.
You might support that if you had people getting beheaded in the streets and Marisol, whatever you call it, being carved
I can't
into
say
people's
because I've never,
chest.
I've never lived in that.
I mean, I remember thinking about that, but Duterte. Here, they'd be like, oh, it's horrific. I'm like, yeah, well, you have drug dealers everywhere shooting people. I don't know. Maybe I'm going to get to the point too where I'm like, yeah, kill them. Okay.
Right, and
you've never lived through that, so you have no idea.
Extrajudicial assassinations of random people in the ocean, and meanwhile, the actual number of indictments of drug traffickers, human traffickers, like those sorts of things, the actual, even the deportation of violent criminals is down because instead they're just going after, your Home Depot guys and your lady selling tamales on the street or whatever. So in any case, the bigger point that I said before is the one that I've been thinking about, which is that, yes, people will tolerate authoritarianism, but only if it's actually benefiting them and only if it comes along with some sort of market increase in their material well-being. They're not going to take mass thugs in the street and I can't afford steak anymore, and I can't make rent at the end of the month and rent is going up, and my healthcare premiums are going up 100% this year, and you shut down the government, can't bother to do anything about it. No, they're not going to take that. And so, your own supporters are going to be demoralized. The opposition is going to be incredibly energized and will, do whatever it takes to send that message. And so, one of the things I've been very worried about the midterm elections and like the gerrymandering and the Supreme Court coming in and them seizing all the voter rolls and, all the executive orders. And I've been very obviously tracking that very closely. What's heartening to me about this is it does look like things are going to be too big to rig. And that very likely the Latino voters, that have shifted and all of these demographics that they counted on to still be in their camp are going to screw their gerrymandering ambitions. And it's going to be too much for them to be able to overcome. Now, what's going to be interesting to see is how do they respond? So, first of all, one option is they just bury their head in the sand. Publicly, we're seeing a lot of that. J.D. Vance saying, oh, these were just New Jersey and Virginia blue states. We can't really read anything into that, which is, he knows that's not true. He knows because he's looking at these same results of freaking Mississippi and all of the Georgia and Pennsylvania. He knows. But I see a lot of that of basically it's no big deal. This doesn't mean anything. We're not going to read anything into it. So one possibility is you just stay the course and you don't really do anything. Another possibility is you try to adjust. You take the message of okay, people are sending us this message on affordability. Trump is now talking about affordability nonstop. I saw Ryan say on Twitter, he's like, by the end of the week, he's going to be talking about fast and free public buses and just totally taking the Zoran mantle. But in any case, we also have, one of his, who is this guy, campaign political director from 2024, talking about how Trump plans to refocus his messaging on cost of living. Let's go ahead and take a listen to that.
75% of Mickey Sherrill's ads were positive, overwhelmingly talking about cost of living and heavily talking about lowering power costs. Jack didn't really talk about that. He talked about taxes and he won the tax vote, but he didn't address those key issues of affordability very effectively. He was mostly talking generically about Change New Jersey. And I'm not denigrating Jack, but it was not in line necessarily with what voters were saying. Two, in Virginia, over half of Winsome Sears ads talked about transgender, and it's not even the top 5 issues, according to voters. Why did Zoran Mondani do so well last night? He relentlessly focused on affordability. People can talk about communists, they can say all these things, but the fact is he was talking about the cost of living.
Folks that I'm talking to privately who are supporters of President Trump think that he needs to be talking about cost of living a whole lot more.
I think you'll see the president talk a lot about cost of living as we turn the year and into the new year. The president is very keyed into what's going on, and he recognizes, like anybody, that it takes time to do an economic turnaround, but all the fundamentals are there. And I think you'll see him be very, very focused on prices.
Saagar, can you give me a view into the White House and how they think about the economy right now?
Yeah, look, none of them are stupid. They did win an election, a popular vote, man, the first since 2004, okay, of a Republican. So that's one thing where we shouldn't always discount necessarily the political skill of the comeback. This happened to Bill Clinton. This happened to, multiple, I could go on forever. Obama, right? All of these people who did seriously get checked in the first 2 years of their presidency, adjusted course, maybe not to the benefit of the country, but to their own political benefit. Their sense generally is that the president does need to talk more about the White House, or about the economy. But
he's talking plenty about the White House.
He's talking too much about the White House. But this is what always belies the problem, is this is not a normal White House. Trump is a singular figure who actually doesn't have to run for re-election again. That's part of the reason he's doing the ballroom and labeling the Oval Office in gilded script that you may see at a Mar-a-Lago resort. That's kind of the stuff he has always cared about, right? And then you have all of these disparate other people. You have the cash grab section, which includes his son and his own family. Then you have the people who are pursuing their own ideological agenda. Let's say Marco Rubio, who's trying to push regime change in Venezuela. JD, who has to try and balance being good to his boss and wanting to run in 2028. So he's probably in the worst position because he's defend all this shit and he has potentially run on it. Again, then you've got the secretaries of Scott Bessent, who are, Scott is ultimately a creature of Wall Street. He does not want to be humiliated in his job because he eventually has to go back. That's what these people all do. Look at Steve Mnuchin and others. And by the way, Mnuchin, part of what guided his behavior when he was a Secretary of the Treasury is he's currently still back on Wall Street. They need to maintain some credibility. So, that's why he's bailing out his friends on Argentina, okay? It's all pay for play, in terms of what the future is. So there's no one sense of the White House. At any one moment, my phone is blowing up from a different contingent of the White House who are pissed at their other colleagues in the White House. look, I've only ever covered really Trump. Like I had no real insight into the Biden administration. They're leaking to a very different. But everything I've ever read, that's not all that common in a White House. So yes, there's a huge contingent of his White House which is upset with the direction that they are taking. But I think the demonstration is that they don't have a lot of power to compel a change in behavior because they're all playing the same game. Sometimes they win, sometimes they don't. So on the affordability piece generally, did you notice the language that he said? We're going to talk more about it. Talk is cheap, bruh.
Yeah, it's not a messaging problem.
It's just like Biden.
Yeah.
No. After the gas prices went up to $5, everyone's like, fuck you. All right. I don't want to hear
it's a
word
problem.
You have to say.
It's not a messaging problem.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And this is the problem, that they have right now. Their heads were far up their ass and they believed the vibe shift. I actually think that more than anything, it's an information bubble. You can see this with a huge amount of Republicans. Twitter, Elon buying Twitter is one of the worst things that ever happened to them because it definitely helped them win the election. But there's no question in the world that a lot of them huff their own bullshit. And there's also a huge perverse incentive in MAGA world to suck up to the White House, right? So no one's inviting me back to the briefing room anytime soon. Nobody is pitching me Scott Bessent or whatever for some fluff. It's not happening, okay? Because they demand total fealty. Like the days of me trying to get a Trump interview or whatever, it's over. It's not going to happen. But that's the issue, is that these people all suck up to them. And so they don't really tell them what they want to hear. So the White House is in a situation where they don't trust mainstream media and they don't even really believe anything that they say. To be fair, they won 2 elections out of 3, or in their mind, 3 out of 3, but whatever. The point, though, is that the stuff that they're consuming, there's one person, Tucker Carlson, who is willing to be like, yeah, I think what you guys are doing is wrong, but turn on Fox News, turn on Glenn Beck, turn on any, right-wing aligned podcast. It's all propaganda all the time. Go on Twitter, you can follow entire accounts, which a lot of these people in the White House do. They're more online than anybody, who are just mainlining propaganda about how great they are.
Yeah.
So imagine, the information environment that they're swimming in. That's really dangerous, actually, when you're in power. And that's why I think some of them were really shocked at the election results. I really do. I mean, I think they knew they were going to lose, but there's all this down ballot stuff that nobody else cares about except for people like me, like the Bucks County School Board, which was like a harbinger of the Youngkin, revolution, anti-CRT, trans stuff. Like the trans mafia is fully back in control if you live in any of these places.
Woke us back, y'all.
Yeah, no, we're fucked.
If
you're a parent, it's not good right now.
To your point, someone shared the stat, these Moms for Liberty school board candidates who are like, conservative, whatever. There were 31 contested races involving Moms for Liberty candidates. You know how many they won? 0.
Yeah, I know.
All 31 lost. Every one. And that's why it was such a reckoning. I mean, I was expecting it to be bad for Republicans. I was not expecting the coast to coast, everything from Georgia and Mississippi. And I mean, every single, whether it's a local level or a state level or somewhere in between, at every single level, it was a uniform shift and reckoning against the Republicans. And so I'm sure they are shell-shocked. And so, the interesting thing will be to see if they do more than just say like, oh, next year we're going to get around to talking about affordability. As to your point, talking about it is not, they would have to do a total 180 on what they've been doing. And this will be a good transition actually into the tariffs. We've got tariffs later on. We'll talk about how the Supreme Court's going to probably rescue them from their tariff insanity. But you have to do a total 180 on the economy. You have to actually deliver on healthcare. You have to actually make people feel like their lives are getting better. And you got to pull the mass thugs out of the neighborhoods. You got to take back the National Guard. Like you have to do a complete 180 on the way that they've been running this administration thus far, or you have to really try to go full authoritarian and make it so that votes don't matter. And I just don't know if there is enough that they could do at this point to truly make sure that, come 2026, there's no meaningful elections whatsoever. I think it's sort of too far gone for, it would take too much and spark too much of a backlash if they were to do what it would take to make it so that there were really no meaningful elections.
Yeah, can it be fixed? I'm not so sure. I'm of the belief that Biden was dead by October of 2021. I don't think there was any world where a Democrat could have won after that period because of the way that he ran the country for up to that time with the inflation and the spike that eventually happened and then his eventual deterioration. I don't see a world where a Democrat could have ever won 2024. Maybe that's a little bit too reductive, but I don't know. I mean, if I
a lot of the cake was baked.
Let's think about it.
Yeah.
I mean, think about the approval, the vibe. I mean, everything was done. I mean, if you think back to that, that's what Youngkin happened, and they were given, a tiny little savior with Roe versus Wade, which gave them a lot of hope, and then they were dead. I mean, it was literally over. So I'm starting to feel a lot of the same way. We're right around the same time. Obviously, a lot could change, but on the horizon, I see much less chance of success and many more pitfalls for things where I see an AI bubble on the horizon. I see a tariff problem on the horizon. I see an international crisis with Taiwan on the horizon. I see regime change in Venezuela. I see Israel and Iran just sitting there, just waiting for something to happen, for some sort of international crisis. Ukraine, still going on. There's a reason we don't want these things to happen, because it doesn't take a genius to read a book and say, at any moment, at any time, the globe can explode and gas prices can explode, right? And can go all the way up like they did under Biden. They can sink your presidency. So this is, and that's why it's to your benefit to try to get these things all wrapped up. I mean, if you asked me when the vibe turned against Trump, what would you say? I would say March. And by the way, I disagree. I think they turned before that. I think it was March of 2025. And if we think back, the vibe was with Doge. They were winning, I think, the vibe wars in the original war. There was the ceasefire that initially happened in February under Steve Witkoff. A lot of the promises made, promises kept stuff was there. The revolution still felt as if it had energy. And right around March, something began to change, where the Doge reality started to hit. The opposition started to flare up. The sheer stupidity of a lot of the White House's statements and things falling apart. I believe CCOT was around that time as well. So if you think about all that together, that is when people were like, whoa, 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 And that's exactly when I started to see a few dissonant comments.
Yeah.
And then things exploded by, I would say, May of 2025.
If you actually look at his approval rating, one of the hits he took was on Kilmar Abrego Garcia.
Yeah.
Because that wrapped up
CCOT
CCOT and lawlessness and all of that sort of stuff. And Democrats, a few of them actually got around to making a point about it. And it sort of focused people's minds on, what was going on in this administration, what it actually looked like. And but I actually feel like the Epstein files were a critical turning point too, because that's when you got some MAGA voices being like, dude, what the hell, And when you have your own side.
They all shut up, didn't they?
When you have your own side, they sure did.
Hey, if you like that video, hit the like button or leave a comment below. It really helps get the show to more people.
And if you'd like to get the full show ad-free and in your inbox every morning, you can sign up at breakingpoints.com.
That's right. Get the full show, help support the future of independent media at breakingpoints.com.